Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell gently on the city's cobblestone streets, reflecting the lamplight in the puddles. Louise Parker, elegant despite her 72 years, crossed the sidewalk toward the Eclat d'Or jewelry store. In her trembling hand rested an old gold necklace, inherited from her mother, fragile and precious. As soon as she entered, the icy silence of the shop made her shiver. Dylan Carter, the head salesman, was talking to a young, noisy customer, completely unaware of her presence. Louise tried to get his attention. "Excuse me. I'd like to have this necklace repaired." But Dylan barely looked up, dodged a mocking smile and turned back to his client, completely ignoring him. Madame Louise felt her chest tighten. She was used to the respect her legal career had earned her, but now she was invisible, treated as if she had no value. Madison Lee, the assistant, walked past her without a word, busy serving a more important client. The humiliation was complete. Louise left the shop without a word, but inside, a flame burned. It wasn't impulsive anger, but a cold, methodical resolve. She knew she possessed the means to restore balance. And she would. Not out of petty revenge, but to reclaim the respect she was owed, and to show that contempt would never go unpunished. That night, sipping her tea in her quiet kitchen, Louise took out a leather notebook. She began to draw up a plan, step by step. The next day, the jewelry store that had ignored her would never be the same again. Evening was falling, but in the heart of Madame Louise Parker, a brilliant idea was taking shape. Justice could take unexpected forms, and sometimes, it came with elegance and determination. The morning was cool and slightly misty when Louise Parker left her house, wrapped in her beige coat and carrying her worn leather bag. In her hands, her mother's old gold necklace gleamed faintly in the raindrops. She walked with a calm but confident gait, aware of the sentimental value of the piece of jewelry. As she approached the Eclat d'Or jewelry store, she noticed the bustle inside, hurried customers, laughter, and conversations muffled by the clinking of the display cases. Louise pushed open the door, and the chime announced her arrival. Instantly, she felt the icy chill of indifference. Dylan Carter, the head salesman, barely glanced at her. His gaze was fixed on a younger, more stylish customer, whom he was serving with an exaggerated smile. Louise tried politely. "Hello. I would like to have this necklace repaired, please." Dylan raised an eyebrow, then glanced at Madison Lee, who was walking behind him, clearly in a hurry to serve another customer. Louise felt a surge of shame and anger. How could anyone ignore an elderly, lonely, and respectful woman? She stood there for a moment, hoping for a gesture of politeness, that an employee would at least deign to glance at her. But nothing. Madison walked around Louise as if she were invisible. The customers nearby watched her go by, perplexed, while Dylan chuckled softly at a joke he and his colleague had just shared. The old woman stepped back slowly, took a deep breath, and left the shop, her heart heavy but her head held high. She didn't yet know how she would act, but an idea was already beginning to take root in her mind: this contempt would not go unpunished. Outside, the rain made her shiver, but she smiled slightly. She knew she possessed something that neither Dylan, nor Madison, nor any employee of this store could ever take: the patience, wisdom, and determination of a woman who knows how to wait for the perfect moment to act. Back home, Louise Parker gently closed the door behind her, leaving the rain and the indifference of the outside world behind. She sat in her favorite armchair, an old, well-worn leather chair, and placed the necklace on the coffee table. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the lingering shock of the contempt she had endured. She thought back to Dylan and Madison's indifferent stares, to the stifled laughter of the other customers. It wasn't just the humiliation that burned within her, it was the feeling that her dignity had been trampled upon for no reason. She, who had spent her life fighting injustice as a lawyer, found herself powerless in the face of the gratuitous arrogance of two young people. While sipping her tea, Louise picked up a leather notebook and pen. Her fingers traced the pages with slow, deliberate precision. She began to write down her thoughts, her resentments, but also possible solutions. Anger was just a spark, strategy would be the fire. She remembered her years in the courts, where patience and preparation had always been more powerful than impulsiveness. Justice is prepared, she murmured to herself. And tonight, in the quiet of her home, she began to prepare it. Louise drew up plans, calculated her resources, and noted down contacts she could approach. She knew she had enough savings to acquire a small business, and the idea took root in her mind, to buy back the jewelry store and restore the dignity that had been stolen from her. As night fell, enveloping the city in its dark cloak, Louise Parker rose, her eyes shining with determination. The rain continued to beat against the windows, as if it too approved of her silent plan. She knew one thing: tomorrow, the world of Golden Shard would never be the same again. The next morning, Louise Parker got up early. The sun filtered through the curtains, but her mind was far from the soft light of her room. Her attention was entirely focused on the plan she had begun to formulate the day before. She knew she had to act quickly and precisely. Louise took out her laptop and began reviewing her finances. Years of judicious investments, small cash moves, and smart decisions had accumulated a substantial sum. She now had the means to transform the humiliation she had suffered into a practical lesson in justice. She called Henry Thompson, her former business partner, a trusted man with whom she had often worked on acquisitions and buyouts. "Henry, there's a shop in our neighborhood, Eclat d'Or. She ignored me yesterday, and I can't let that go," she said calmly, but with a hint of contained anger. Henry, surprised by Louise's initiative, took a few seconds before replying. "Louise, are you serious? You want to buy the jewelry store?" "Absolutely," she replied firmly. "I want to make sure that respect is restored. I want to show that arrogance has consequences." Henry, admiring Louise's determination, agreed to help her. Together, they began preparing the necessary documents, verifying the business's value, and planning the strategic approach of the owner, Mr. Robert Sinclair. Louise took note of every detail: the employees, the clientele, the inventory, and above all, how she would reorganize the shop after the purchase. That evening, Louise felt both excited and focused. She knew this operation would require patience, subtlety, and composure. But one thing was clear: she would not act out of petty revenge, but out of justice and respect for every client who might be humiliated in the future. Before going to bed, Louise placed her notebook on the bedside table and gazed at her mother's necklace. A flame of quiet satisfaction burned in her eyes. She knew that the next day would mark the beginning of her revenge, elegant, methodical, and definitive. The next morning, Louise Parker picked up the phone with quiet determination. Every breath was measured, every gesture precise. She dialed the number for the Eclat d'Or jewelry store, her heart pounding but her mind clear. "Hello, Mr. Sinclair. This is Louise Parker. I'd like to discuss an opportunity regarding your company." Her voice was calm, composed, but charged with the quiet strength of a woman who never lets herself be intimidated. Robert Sinclair, the owner, a businessman accustomed to quick discussions and impersonal transactions, replied in his usual authoritarian tone. "Yes, what exactly do you want, Mrs. Parker?" "I would like to buy your jewelry store," Louise replied simply. There was a silence. Sinclair initially thought it was a joke or a misunderstanding. An elderly customer buying a boutique? Unthinkable. But when Louise detailed her conditions, her financial capacity, and her vision for the business, Sinclair realized she was serious. After a few minutes of polite but firm negotiation, they reached an agreement. Louise would have complete control of the shop in the coming days. Everything seemed to have gone too smoothly for Sinclair, but for Louise, every detail had been meticulously planned. Across town, Henry Thompson smiled behind his screen. He knew this buyout wasn't just a financial transaction, it was the first act of a stylish and calculated revenge. Louise, meanwhile, hung up the phone and gently set down the receiver. She took a deep breath, feeling a thrill of satisfaction for the first time in a long time. What none of the employees at Eclat d'Or yet knew was that the moment they laughed at and ignored a customer, that same customer could become their superior overnight. Louise Parker now had all the means to transform the humiliation suffered into resounding and definitive justice. Night was falling, and in Louise's silent office, the plans were taking shape. She had the keys to the shop, the money to buy it back, and the intention of restoring order and respect. The countdown to revenge had officially begun. The following morning, the window of Eclat d'Or was illuminated by a large sign. Sold. New management, Ms. Louise Parker. Passers-by stopped, stunned. Whispers and murmurs drifted through the street. Louise, elegant and composed, entered the boutique with confidence. Her perfectly tailored beige coat and distressed leather bag betrayed nothing of the inner turmoil within her. Dylan Carter and Madison Lee, the employees who had ignored her the day before, froze when she entered. Their mocking smiles had vanished, replaced by palpable embarrassment. Louise walked toward them, fixing her gaze on each with a mixture of gentleness and firmness. Dylan. Madison, she began in a calm voice, almost lilting in its precision. You were too busy yesterday to grant me the most basic respect. Today, I am informing you that you are no longer employed by this shop. The shock froze the room. Dylan tried to stammer something out, an awkward argument, but Louise raised her hand and said, "This isn't about revenge. It's about respect and dignity. Anyone who can't treat our customers with care and humanity is free to look for another job." Madison lowered her eyes, unable to speak. The customers in the shop murmured, some trying to understand, others silently rejoicing at the turn of events. Louise continues. From today onward, this shop is a place where every customer is respected, regardless of their appearance or age. And I expect you to understand the seriousness of what you lost by being disrespectful yesterday. The former employees left the shop without protest, heads bowed, while Louise watched them go with silent satisfaction. She knew this lesson would be etched in their memories, and that no arrogance could ever again be expressed without consequence. The new employees, carefully selected and respectful, would soon take their place, transforming the shop into a welcoming and dignified place, reflecting Madame Louise Parker's vision. At that moment, Louise smiled slightly. The first act of her revenge had just been played out, and the echo of justice had just resonated within the walls of Eclat d'Or. In the days that followed, a new and strange atmosphere settled over Eclat d'Or. Former employees Dylan Carter and Madison Lee couldn't help but speak in hushed tones backstage. Every gesture, every glance from Louise Parker reminded them that they were no longer in control of the place. Louise, for her part, moved through the shop calmly and precisely. She observed every detail, the arrangement of the display cases, the cleanliness of the jewelry, the way customers were greeted. Her attentive gaze missed nothing. Every employee quickly understood that patience and respect were no longer options, but strict and absolute rules. The former employees began to feel increasingly uneasy. Dylan realized he had lost not only a job, but also his reputation in the neighborhood. Madison understood that her mocking laughter and arrogance had come at a high price. They tried to regain some semblance of normalcy, but every move was watched, every mistake immediately corrected by Louise. The contrast was striking. While the older generation trembled under the weight of their own guilt, Louise serenely prepared for the future. She began to draw up a list of open positions and new recruits she would hire, carefully selecting competent, humble, and respectful individuals. "The store must reflect our philosophy," she whispered to Henry Thompson during a phone call. "Every customer must feel valued, every employee must understand that there are consequences to arrogance." Fear and guilt took deep root in the minds of those who had ignored Louise the first time. They knew they had been judged, not by anger, but by justice. And this justice took the form of an elderly woman, calm, methodical, and incredibly powerful in her resolve. For Louise, each day was a step toward the complete transformation of the jewelry store. She knew that the respect and dignity she commanded would be felt not only by her employees, but by everyone who crossed the threshold of Eclat d'Or. And she silently savored this elegant revenge, where patience and strategy triumphed over impulsive anger. Louise Parker knew that to transform Eclat d'Or, she needed to choose employees who shared her values, respect, patience, and excellence. She spent several days interviewing candidates, observing not only their technical skills, but above all their attitude toward customers and their ability to work with dignity. That's how she met Emily Johnson, a dynamic yet humble young woman with a genuine smile and a gentle voice that immediately put customers at ease. Then she met Marcus Brown, a talented jeweler, meticulous and passionate about his craft, but above all respectful and patient with customers and colleagues. "I want you to understand one thing," Louise said during their first meeting. "Here, every customer is treated with respect, and every employee treats themselves and their colleagues with dignity. If you accept these rules, you will be free to work in a fair and peaceful environment." Emily and Marcus exchanged a knowing look and nodded. For them, working with Louise was not only a professional opportunity, but also a life lesson. Meanwhile, Dylan and Madison watched the scene unfold from the back room, powerless. Their former arrogance had been replaced by fear and regret. Every smile exchanged between Louise and her new employees reminded them that they had lost much more than just a job. They had lost the opportunity to be part of a project built on respect and integrity. Louise began to reorganize the boutique, new window displays, better presentation of the jewelry, and above all, training for employees on customer service. Every detail was considered so that Eclat d'Or would become a welcoming, warm place where every customer would feel valued. The entire neighborhood began to notice the change. Customers who had once been ignored now spoke of the shop with enthusiasm. The name Louise Parker spread like a breath of inspiration, and even those who had scorned her began to understand that this calm, methodical, elderly woman had just transformed their world. In her office, Louise observed her new employees with a discreet smile. She knew the shop wasn't perfect yet, but the most important thing was done. A culture of respect and dignity was now inscribed within its walls. Weeks passed, and Eclat d'Or was transformed under Louise Parker's direction. The display windows shone with a new light, each piece of jewelry was perfectly presented, and the atmosphere in the boutique was both warm and elegant. Customers came and went with a smile, impressed by the attention and courtesy they received. Emily Johnson greeted each visitor with patience and respect, explaining the details of the jewelry with clarity and passion. Marcus Brown, meanwhile, repaired and polished the pieces with exemplary precision, impressing even the most demanding clients. Louise observed every interaction with a watchful yet benevolent eye, intervening only when necessary. Meanwhile, Dylan Carter and Madison Lee still wandered the neighborhood streets, aware that their arrogance had robbed them of a valuable lesson. Every compliment for the shop, every smile from Louise and her new employees, was a cruel reminder of their mistake. They finally realized that respect and dignity aren't conveyed with words alone, but with actions and unwavering commitment. The reputation of Eclat d'Or grew rapidly. Customers who had once been ignored returned regularly and recommended the shop to their friends and family. The shop became a symbol of quiet justice and impeccable professionalism. One morning, Louise walked past the old, still dusty display windows in the back section, where Dylan and Madison had often laughed and ignored customers. She smiled slightly, remembering their arrogance. But this smile wasn't one of petty revenge, it was the satisfaction of having restored order and dignity, and of having transformed a place of contempt into a space of excellence and respect. At that moment, Louise understood that her victory was not only financial or professional, it was moral and lasting. Eclat d'Or was finally shining for its true worth, not only through its jewelry, but also through the culture and atmosphere it had created. A few months after the acquisition of Eclat d'Or, the boutique had become a true model in the neighborhood. Customers flocked in, drawn not only by the quality of the jewelry, but also by the respectful and humane experience that Louise Parker had established. Every visitor was greeted courteously, listened to attentively, and treated with equal consideration, whether rich or modest, young or old. Dylan Carter and Madison Lee, however, could no longer ignore the impact of their past actions. They had tried to find other jobs, but everywhere they applied, the reputation of Golden Shard and its new management preceded them. Their former arrogance was now perceived as an irreparable character flaw. One evening, Dylan went to the shop to see for himself. Through the window, he watched Emily greet an elderly customer with a genuine smile, while Marcus patiently explained the history of an antique pendant. Louise Parker, in her office, calmly oversaw the whole scene. Dylan felt a sharp pang of humiliation. What he had despised yesterday had become the epitome of professionalism and dignity. Madison, who was passing by a few minutes later, also stopped. She realized that their laughter, their mockery, and their arrogance had cost them much more than a job. They had lost the chance to learn what respect and responsibility truly meant. Louise, for her part, felt no vindictive satisfaction. For her, the lesson was complete when she saw the shop thriving and the employees happy, aware that their work was valued and respected. Her revenge lay not in the pain inflicted on the former employees, but in the transformation of the place and the example she had set for the entire neighborhood. Silently, Louise watched the scene, her mother's necklace resting on her desk. She reflected that true justice wasn't measured by the defeat of others, but by the creation of a space where one could learn, grow, and be treated with dignity. And in this neighborhood, Eclat d'Or had become that place. Morning dawned over the city, and the sun's rays illuminated the window of Eclat d'Or. The jewels sparkled, but it wasn't just their brilliance that captivated the eye, it was the atmosphere of respect, warmth, and elegance that reigned in the shop. Louise Parker, standing behind the counter, watched her employees at work. Emily Johnson greeted customers with a genuine smile, while Marcus Brown worked on a ring with exemplary precision. Every gesture, every word reflected the values Louise had instilled: dignity, respect, and excellence. Former employees Dylan Carter and Madison Lee sometimes walked past the shop, their faces grim. They knew they had lost more than a job, they had witnessed the transformation of a place they had once despised, and they understood that their arrogance could never return. Louise didn't blame them, their defeat was the natural consequence of their own behavior. Louise stepped out into the street for a moment, breathing in the fresh air and watching the passers-by who curiously entered her shop. The smiles she saw on their faces reflected the true victory. She had proven that respect and dignity could change not only a place, but also people's perceptions and attitudes. In her study, her mother's necklace lay on the polished wood of the desk. Louise gazed at it tenderly. This small piece of gold, which had been the cause of her initial humiliation, now symbolized her silent and methodical victory. She had used not anger, but patience, strategy, and intelligence to restore what had been wronged. As she prepared to welcome a new customer, Louise Parker smiled slightly. The boutique shone not only with its jewelry, but with its subtle sense of justice, wisdom, and humanity. Eclat d'Or was no longer just a jewelry store, it was a symbol of what dignity and respect could achieve. And in this neighborhood, everyone now knew that a calm and methodical old woman could change the course of things with elegance and determination. The revenge had been sweet, just, and complete, and the lesson would remain etched in the walls of the shop for years to come.